her manufacturing history, and frankly, doing so 180 degrees from the actual truth of the history on the issue. Aaron David Miller, CNN analyst, longtime diplomat, addressing Tlaib's command of history.
She also has her history wrong. I mean, on 2 points. Number one, it's an arguable proposition, even had there been no Holocaust. Most of the institutions of the current state of Israel were in place before Hitler started killing Jews. So the Holocaust added urgency and international support. But I suspect with or without it, the state of Israel would have come into being. And finally, on this notion that Palestinians either negatively or positively helped to create a safe haven for Jews, the reality is that the Arabs of Palestine, Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti, in Nazi Germany, collaborating, coordinating with the Nazis about what would happen if Rommel's Third Corps had actually been successful in Egypt and been present in Palestine. They were considering extermination of the entire Jewish community there as well. So this was ill-timed, ill-advised, and I think it clearly is simply going to antagonize and polarize the already polarized debate in Washington.
Yes, ill-advised, ill-timed. She is rather sickening, I find. For more on the topic, we're pleased to be joined by Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. He's the president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, co-founder of the Muslim Reform Movement. He's a former U.S. Navy lieutenant commander, and he's the author of the book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam. And again, I refer to him as Dr. Zuhdi Jasser because he's one of those doctors that helps people, unlike PhDs.
Oh, that
do not help people.
Oh, can we
That's the difference. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good to be with you, Dan and Amy. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So your reaction to both Tlaib's historical perspective and the firestorm it's generated?
Yeah, I think we need, let's put it in context. The context is that she represents the reasons why the Palestinians have been run by radical Islamists, be it from Hamas or across the planet through their media and propaganda. This was not a one-off. She is not a one-off. She is exemplary of their leadership, which create new histories, revise history, and you could even listen to her and hear a sarcasm, which in many ways not only is Holocaust denial, but turns the Palestinians into victims when, in fact, as Aaron David Miller mentioned, they were working with Hitler. Their mufti for 25 years was close to Hitler. Then in the Cold War, they were close to the Soviets. They were constantly on the side of the enemies of Israel and constantly looking for war, never recognizing the Jewish people or the state of Israel. In that same radio interview, she talked about the one-state solution, which is a Palestinian method of talking about negating the state of Israel. One state means the Palestinians become a majority and Israel ceases to exist. Rashida Tlaib is a defender of the BDS movement, which also negates the state of Israel and seeks to delegitimize it. So I hope Americans realize it's not just sort of a radical that happened to have been elected from her district. This is why the Palestinians have been unable to be legitimate partners in peace. They are run by radical Islamists. They elect people like Marwan Barghouti, who runs Hamas and launches missiles on innocents and others. So I hope Americans are starting to get an education about how radical really the leadership is of the Palestinian community.
And I mean, think about Nancy Pelosi. I mean, are you surprised though that she called this a gross misrepresentation and that we need to apologize to Representative Tlaib?
Amy, I'm so glad you brought that up because this is the other issue is really, I mean, I as an American Muslim, are we treating my communities as children? Come on, we're not infants. We are adults. Treat us as adults. If Jared Kushner, when he's talking about a peace plan, had said such a thing in defense of the Palestinians, as President Trump tweeted, they would have been treated like complete white supremacists because of that kind of comment. And yet, David Duke is cheering on Ilhan Omar and cheering on Rashida Tlaib because these comments are truly and deeply anti-Semitic, and no one would tolerate such a thing from the right. And Pelosi is too weak-kneed to take on somebody with large social media platforms that was just on the cover of Rolling Stone with her. And again, it's a bigotry of low expectations. You have Democrats from Earl Blumenauer up to Steny Hoyer, who, by the way, is going on a trip to Israel this summer, while Rashida Tlaib is taking members of Congress funded by a group called the Humpty Dumpty Institute visit Gaza. So this is where Congress has degenerated to, in which they're fostering the most radical elements of our community, and then we wonder why Muslims are radicalized, because the left is ignoring the core of the radicalization, which is anti-Semitic and anti-American.
Speaking of radicalization on American soil, this story out this week, another makeshift compound, training ground for jihadists found in Macon County, Alabama, connected to the one that was found a few months earlier in New Mexico. The connection is led by the same guy, Siraj Wahaj. And what that says about the danger we have still with homegrown terrorism almost 2 decades after 9/11, and despite the leadership, the rhetorical and intellectual and otherwise, the leadership of peaceful pluralist Muslims like yourself.
This story is so important because Siraj Wahaj's father is Siraj Wahaj Sr. In my book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam, that I wrote 5 years ago, I talk about the only Islamic Society of North America meeting I went to, in which Siraj Wahaj Sr., as a leader for the Islamic Society of North America, the largest Muslim organization in America, is still a board member for CARE as an advisory fundraiser, and does tons of fundraisers. So this is his son that ran this compound in Alabama, ran the compound in New Mexico. The reason we're hearing about the Alabama one now is the FBI just unsealed a ton of documents, but it was found at the time the New Mexico one was found, and they found kids training on militant terrorist training, if you will, to commit acts of terror. And America sort of dismisses it often, the mainstream media especially, as, oh, these are just sort of some type of separatist cult, when in fact the chain goes directly to major Islamist organizations, and you wonder why the apple doesn't far fall from that tree, which is separatist, anti-American, and then some of them end up militant. Many of them don't, but they're still separatist and anti-American in their mindset. And his grandfather, Siraj Wahaj Sr., was in 1995 holding a Quran up to 50,000 Muslims saying, we need to make America into an Islamic state and have the Quran replace the U.S. Constitution, because this is a book of God and the Constitution is just a book of man, written by men. And so this is what I saw. I told them at the time, this is sedition. You can disagree with policy, but this is sedition. And then you wonder why his kid ends up running a radical terror camp, and why Linda Sarsour and Ilhan Omar and many other organizations say that Siraj Wahaj Sr. is one of their favorite imams. And we ignore this fact. We ignore the fact that the Muslim American Society has a school in Philadelphia that was teaching kids to sing about chopping heads off, and that's an organization that Ilhan Omar was proud to be a part of as she was raised in the refugee community of Minnesota.
We've talked about CARE before. I want to get to this sort of capitulation, the sentimental capitulation to the intemperate. So the Chicago Cubs, you probably saw the story. The patriarch of the Ricketts family, Joe Ricketts, made some intemperate comments and emails that were hacked and released, made some intemperate comments about Muslims. So now the Chicago Cubs' response, as I understand it, is to quote-unquote partner with CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations.
And they're donating money to CARE.
Donating money, like do a national anthem, do something, just do all the sort of the pro forma things as a way to genuflect before CARE to make amends for whatever Joe Ricketts says. Number one, you want to make an apology. Joe Ricketts has, families said, those aren't reflective of Chicago Cubs values, all the typical pro forma stuff. Well, why is it that so much of corporate America, even within sort of center-right ranks, is so ignorant of organizations like CARE, who they truly are, the ideas they truly represent, the policy agenda they truly have, in addition to what you're saying before, too. I mean, these stories about this terrorist training compound in Macon County, Georgia, we talked about it, but the school in Philadelphia where kids are singing about beheadings, I mean, these stories barely make it above the fold for most people.
Well, because what we do is we have this ADD approach to Muslims, in which we deal with it for, a few hours or a few days after a terror attack, and then we ignore it, when in fact the Muslim organizations that corporate America, that mainstream America should be bonding with, are the ones that not only are against terror, but are for American ideas, universal human rights, the equality of men and women, pro-women's rights, pro-minority rights, and realize that we have a Muslim problem that needs a Muslim solution. And that's what our Muslim reform movement does, is we recognize that we need to reform the ideas of theocracy. But these ideological litmus tests are taboo to talk about, because the Council on American Islamic Relations, working from the platform of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, large global governmental movements like Iran and Saudi Arabia and elsewhere that want to put the West on defense, say that anytime we mention anything about Islam, then it must be bigoted. They have had a platform, they're given a platform, and unfortunately they've become the primary and only spokespeople from the Islamic establishment, and they want to check the box that they've sort of absolved themselves of any guilt of anti-Muslim bigotry, when in fact they're working with the bigots in our community. Here are the bigots in our community. They are the ones who put women in the back of the mosque. They have only men on their boards. They only think that the only Muslims that represent us are the ones with hijabs and the fundamentalists, and they dismiss any of the radicals because they're working closely with them. And I think that's the ultimate form of bigotry. It's a bigotry of low expectations that thinks that Muslims will never take ownership of their own ideas, never become Americanized, but will just sort of keep them in the movies and elsewhere, but never deal with them in an equal type of tough love. Because right now we'll just sort of dismiss with them as a minority, and I think that's the ultimate form of bigotry.
Did you get invited to speak on college campuses, invited to address corporate leaders?
Certainly not by the mainstream. I've spoken at Notre Dame, at Duke, at Utah, Wisconsin, and elsewhere, but those invitations have come from conservative groups, and then I've been attacked, and we had to move it to more secure locations on campus. It was never given the same type of billing and respect that radicals like Linda Sarsour or Ilhan Omar get.
Yeah, the kind of respect. Yeah, U.S. Navy Lieutenant Commander, co-founder, American Islamic Forum for Democracy, medical doctor. Yeah, why should you get respect? Also, the book is A Battle for the Soul of Islam. He's Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. Dr. Jasser, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yep, always a pleasure. And he